the entities, right?
Yeah.
So to answer your question about do people see the same things, everyone's experience is certainly different, but there are certain universal DMT motifs, if you like, that many people describe. The structure, the ambience of the space, the geometry, and also, of course, the beings within the space, the so-called DMT entities. And this goes back, I mean, of course, it goes back to these indigenous tribes in Amazonia who are using DMT. They used it to communicate with beings. They call them spirits or gods, right? We might have a different name for them now, but certainly it was clear that this is a characteristic feature of the DMT experience is the experience of other beings. And Stephen Zara, so you mentioned these elves, right? Terence McKenna, the elves, the machine elves, as Terence McKenna called them, they're by far the most famous denizens of these hyperdimensional realms. There's no doubt about that. And many people like to say, well, people see elves because McKenna saw elves and McKenna spoke about elves, so that's why you're seeing elves. And it's like, it's hard to get past that. So what we did actually a few years back is to go back to the original trip reports. Let's go back to the 1950s. Look at the trip reports there. Stephen Zara's very first study. Now, unfortunately, back then, they weren't that interested in the kind of the details of the trip report. This is not like Rick Strassman's study in the 90s, where he carefully had them, write down everything they experienced. So if they would say, I saw hallucinations. But even within these old papers, you get these little snippets of trip reports that had back then the characteristic DMT flavor. So they were describing this rapidly changing, rapid procession of complex geometric imagery. They were describing beings that they called gods, language of the time, or they would call them spirits. That was the lexicon of the time, if you like. You see some kind of non-human intelligence and you refer to it as a spirit. Nowadays, we might call it something else. But one of Stephen Zara's first subjects described these little dwarf-like beings that moved around very quickly. That's all we got. But to me, this is part of the characteristic of these DMT elves, these very sprightly, lively beings, often very cheerful, and they kind of welcome you into the space, and they love to show you things all the time. Look at this, look at this, look at this. They were there in the first trip reports, and then through the 60s and on, with people like Timothy Leary describing elf-like beings and insectoid-like beings and reptilians, and there are certain types reptilians, man, and they can be ferocious. In Rick Strassman's study, one of the subjects described being how should we say, raped by reptilians.
What?
Yeah.
So there's bad beings in there?
Oh. Yeah, fortunately, before anyone has become totally kind of frightened by DMT, the vast majority of entity encounters are either positive or neutral. Often they will
The majority?
We're talking like 90%, yeah.
But what about that 10%? What's going on with those guys?
Well, I mean, they vary as much in their character as they do their form. We wouldn't predict this was all beings of love and light. I mean, that's to be expected, right? The same on Earth. Not everyone's nice. Most people are nice,
right?
To some,
yes,
or kind of neutral. And this is the same in the DMT space.
Okay.
They often seem to be aware of their the large gap between their intelligence and this is their world after all that we're kind of entering, if you like. So, and they like to kind of have fun, some of them. So there's a lot of kind of mocking going on sometimes, teasing, and
right,
kind of trickstery kind of behavior with these entities. They like to scare you. So you have to be kind of aware of that. But there's no evidence that they can actually do you any harm other than giving you a bit of a scare.
All right, so I want to talk about some archetypes of entities that are commonly referred to. Let's talk about the elves or the machine elves. Small beings seem slightly mischievous, definitely not malevolent, certainly doesn't seem to be in the highly benevolent class either. So what is this? What is that phenomenon? And I want to talk about them, and I want to talk about the mantis beings, and then I want to talk about some of the more angelic beings that you might encounter. But let's start with the elves. What's going on here?
Well, the elves, I can probably start there. I mean, the elves, or gnomes, or pixies, or Terence McKenna used to call them tykes, as well as machine elves. They go back in pure DMT studies. They go back to Stephen Zara's first study. So Stephen Zara was this Hungarian physician who discovered the psychedelic effects of DMT. He synthesized it himself. He injected it into himself. This was the good old days when you know, proper real scientists who injected drugs into themselves. And he discovered the psychedelic effects of DMT and immediately started recruiting mainly doctors and nurses from the hospital. And one of his first subjects actually reported this experience of seeing these very small beings, like dwarves, she described them, that were moving very, very quickly. That's all we got. But there was an indication there that even, you know, this... People often say that, oh, it's only because Terence McKenna talks about the elves that people see elves. And that's never made any sense to me whatsoever, because elf-like experiences, yes, he christened them the machine elves, but these diminutive, lively, mischievous beings, as you described them, they go back to the beginning. And in indigenous traditions as well, they often talk about the little people. One of the names of the chacruna plant, actually, by a different group, is oprito, which means little heavenly people, because the chacruna plant, which contains DMT, allows them to see the oprito, which is the little heavenly people. Users of the apina snuffs, these virola-based resin snuffs. When Richard Schultz was surveying or doing work in the Amazon back in the 1950s, one of his assistants said to him while he was looking at this virola tree, said to him, "Oh, this is the tree my father uses pellets from when he wants to see the little people." So these little people, they're not some idiosyncratic thing that's bubbling up out of Terence McKenna's mind, but they seem to be a universal feature of DMT-induced experiences. So where do they come from? We don't know. People have said that they are, you know, this is the trickster or the jester archetype. To me, that's a very simplistic explanation. Archetype provide kind of the broad brushstrokes for certain universal characters, but they don't capture the truly complex and dynamic and intelligent behavior of these beings, which certainly seem entirely non-human, and yet in a weird kind of way familiar. They're waiting for you. They welcome you into the space. They're the ones that are throwing the party, if you like. They're the ones ringing the bells and flashing the lights and kind of cheering, you know, this great hurrah as you enter the space. You know, he's back. Welcome back. So I think they're an integral part of this space, whatever they are, and they ought to be cherished, I guess, because they are kind of wonderful, I think.
All right, I got to talk to you about mantis beings. I'm imagining that, you know, you guys have reports of this mantis class of beings as this kind of, I don't know, I guess neurosurgeon of the cosmos. That's at least what it was to me. How does that resonate with what you've seen from the field research about this class of beings?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that the elves, these little diminutive, jovial ones, they're extremely common, obviously, seem to be a fundamental feature of the state, but so do the mantis beings. And as you say, they are universally almost described as much more powerful, much more intelligent, seem to often described as like alien doctors or alien surgeons. They seem to be much more powerful, much more knowledgeable, and have an entirely different kind of intent to the elf-like being. The elf-like beings are all about showing you things, having fun, taking that opportunity when you're there to kind of show you what's possible when you let them do their thing, whether it's showing you Fabergé eggs of 9 dimensions or things like that, or singing impossible objects into existence, as Dennis McKenna used to describe it. But the mantis beings are of a completely different order. And that's fascinating, right? If you think about the way that we imagine, if you look at a mantis, just a regular mantis, it has that quality. It has this slightly, it's the closest insect to a human, and yet it seems entirely alien in a sense. If you wanted to imagine an alien being, a mantis would be a pretty good approximation. These big and this triangular head and the massive eyes. It looks like if you're an insect or even a small bird, you're careful when you're around a mantis, right? And you've seen videos of them devouring things' head. I mean, these are brutal creatures. And when you meet them in this space, again, the mantis, they have that quality in that they are, incredibly intelligent and technologically sophisticated. And their purpose is not just to show you things, but to do things to you. Neurosurgery and incredibly sophisticated neuropsychosurgery. And that is reported again and again. Even people who have no familiarity with the lore, so to speak, of DMT will very often find themselves in the land of the mantises. You are not guaranteed an audience with the great spirit of the forest. There is a very real possibility that you will encounter beings from the more objectionable end of the spectrum of entities, and the mantis beings certainly seem to have the potential to sit at that more horrifying and objectionable and I dare say sometimes quite malevolent end of that spectrum.
So what are your thoughts on the angels, star beings, and then this kind of archangel all the way up to the ascended master level, like Yeshua level encounters?
Well, I mean, I think there's no reason to think, and certainly the experiences bear this out, that there aren't levels of beings, just as there are on Earth. There are, from very, very small and what we would see as insignificant kind of creatures, or certainly less intelligent and powerful than us. And why wouldn't that continue onwards? And so if we enter this space that is clearly populated with this extremely diverse panoply of beings, then you would expect to see beings that are from the kind of the lower end. I don't mean that in a negative sense in any way, such as the elves, for example, or higher beings like the mantises, and then perhaps even much higher than that. And I think it's easy to be distracted by form. I don't think that the mantis beings in their true form are actually insectoid. I just think this is how they have to take on a form for us to experiencing them. You know, our brain has to kind of construct a model of these beings, a
Yes.
representation
Yes.
of these beings. And sometimes they actually make that clear. There are reports of people who will say, are you really a fucking insect? And they would say, no, of course not. But we appear in this form to you because this is the form that makes sense to you. So I don't know whether the intelligence or intelligences or beings within this DMT space, whether it's an expression or a fragment or different perspectives, that you're seeing the same grand, vast intelligence that you, Aubrey, might call God, right? Whether these are just the million masks of God, as Chesterton called it, right? And we are one of the masks of God. And you are
beautiful.
seeing one, you know, you might see a number of these different perspectives, these different masks of God. But ultimately, it's all the same thing. You're just seeing different fragments, different angles, different shadings, different perspectives of the same being. And sometimes you can transcend form. The most common types of entity encounters actually are not elves, they're not mantises, but they are some kind of amorphous, undeniable presence of some great, vast, normally loving, guiding, protecting, nurturing intelligence that doesn't take on a form, but is there with you. So I think, we can.
And that's very much like the Mother Ayahuasca, right? Like, I mean, for me, I've encountered Mother Ayahuasca countless times. She's never appeared in form. It's a presence and a voice, actually.
You've got it. Exactly.
But I've never seen her. You know, I can't tell you what she looks like. You know, it's something far.
It doesn't matter
far
in a way.
Beyond that, it doesn't matter.
Like. Yeah. So it's easy to get distracted by what did it look like? Well, actually, that's not so important. I think that's just kind of the interface by which we can interact with these intelligences.
I think one of the key things to think about is like tulpa. A tulpa is a Tibetan thought form. Like, you know, we may have imaginary friends when we're young. An egregore is multiple tulpas. So this is like your religions. So if I say Christ consciousness, it has so many connotations because it's its own thing. It's sentient. You know, we've given it sentience, you know, because we've had encounters, partly because, you know, we're picking up on it. But I think, you know, we are world builders. We have become gods in the sense that we create these presences because we are multitudes. As Andrew says, we're, you know, why wouldn't there be such a cosmos of entities and things that protect us and things that maybe test us?